Hey, I'm Wes Hagen. I'm the vineyard manager and winemaker here for Clopepi Vineyards and Clopepi Estate Wines, and we are here looking out the window at Clopepi on another windy day. Windy days we do this inside. I apologize that the background isn't quite as beautiful as it normally is. This will be also the preview of the new hair. Lost to 2 or 3 pounds last week and cut about 8 or 9 inches off the mop. So, hello world. We're going to answer some questions today. We've got 5 questions from folks who send them in via Facebook to our fan page at Clopepi. You can send it also to @WesHagen at Twitter. The first question comes from my friend Veronica Morris, and she says, what are the 3 most basic concepts in learning to appreciate wine? She's just kind of getting into wine and she wanted to know how to go about it. Well, I think the first thing is really to trust your own palate and drink what you love and love what you drink. If that means starting off with Moscato and Cupcake Cabernet, wines that are a little sweet, wines that show a lot of fruit, wines that are easy to drink, there's nothing wrong with that. Don't try to be a wine geek the first week. You know, try some Brachetto, try some sweet red, try some sweet whites. You're going to find that you're going to like wine better when you start with slightly sweet wines. Dry wines, tannic wines, heavy wines, old wines, they do require a little bit more sort of background and frame of reference to understand. So don't feel like you've missed out on wine because you don't get dry wine. Most people start, you know, my folks started with Lancers. I mean, all of these wines, most people start with sweet wines and then move to dry. So start with something a little sweeter and then move to something drier as soon as you start looking for a different flavor and maybe the sweetness is becoming a little more cloying and you want something that matches with food a little bit better. And speaking of that, I really like the idea of someone who's young and passionately sort of interested in wine, getting together and making a wine group. And this just means finding 5, 6, 10, dozen friends, and once a week, once a month, once every 2 weeks, everyone comes to a rotating host, and you all bring a wine in a brown paper bag. Maybe the night's theme is Syrah, maybe it's Pinot Noir, maybe it's the Central Coast, maybe it's the Loire Valley of France. Whatever that is, go in, everyone brings a wine, you taste them all blind before you know anything that you're tasting except for the theme, and then after you've all tasted them blind and discussed them, then you want to pull them out of the bag, put them out on the counter, and go through and taste them again and see how your taste change depending on what you know you're tasting, what your friends think, and that's a really, really good way of teaching yourself how to love wine. And if you do this every week, you don't need a wine education, you don't need the wine spectator, you don't need the wine advocate. You will become your own greatest expert because you will know what you like blind and when you know what something is after looking at the label. And then of course, I think, you know, if you can get away with it, drink wine every night with dinner. So you can travel the world in a glass, you know, from $5 to $50. You've never had the better chance of tasting so many gorgeous wines all around the world. So supermarket, down at your local liquor store, or at a bottle shop where you have some customer service folks that can really guide you towards beautiful and wonderful wines. I recommend getting something in the glass, something on the table every night, so when you eat your dinner, regardless of what you're having, you start learning how to integrate wine into the meal, into the experience of dining, bringing people together, and that's really what table and dining is all about. So hopefully that'll give you some good examples of how to start, Veronica, and thanks for the question. Next, one of our favorite unpaid pickers, Richard Gattell. He's been here picking fruit for probably 10 years, helps us and volunteers during our harvest season. His question is, what are my thoughts on native yeast fermentation? Would the relationship be symbiotic and potentially positive on resulting wine, or is it a question of economics? You know what I'll get with commercial yeast, and so they're safer. Have I experimented with native yeast? I don't believe in native yeast. I believe in feral yeast. With so many wineries in this valley, we don't really know what yeast are kind of blowing by, that are in my hair, that are on my skin, that are up my nose. Yeast is floating everywhere in the world, and there's not one place where grapes are grown that I know of that there's not yeast floating by that attach themselves to the skins of those grapes. So that's one reason why they don't serve grapes in prison. You crush a grape skin wherever it's grown, there's probably some Saccharomyces cerevisiae or some Saccharomyces biennis on there that'll start turning that sugar into ethanol and carbon dioxide. So native yeast, not so sure what it is. Do I know people that use the yeast that comes in on the grapes at Clopepi? Absolutely. They say it's fantastic yeast. Could it be from Babcock or Melville or from other places down the road? It could be, depending on where the wind is blowing. So I like the term feral a little bit better. What I do in my own commercial production is I let the wines start on their feral yeast and they start to ferment. And once the fermentation has taken maybe 1 or 2 bricks away, I know that the grapes are really ready to start fermenting. So then I add a commercial yeast strain. So I get a little of the complexity of a feral yeast fermentation, but then I also finish the wine to perfect dryness with a commercial yeast strain, usually RC212, Barolo 97, or Aspenhausen are kind of my favorite go-to Pinot Noir yeast. For Chardonnay, I really like CY3079. But I have done indigenous and feral yeast fermentation trials, and it seems like all the wines go dry and they're very pretty, but I do have a little bit of that fear in me that commercially they won't finish and the wine may get stuck. Hasn't happened, but I do feel good about using a commercial yeast strain, so I know kind of what to expect and that the wines will have a sort of a consistency from vintage to vintage as far as the yeast goes, so it's not just what flew in on the wind. But flying in the wind is kind of sexy in its own way too. So that pretty much, is it a symbiotic relationship? Is it terroir? Well, considering we still have stolen grapevines growing in alien soil, I don't see how the terroir thing works out, and since most of the yeast strains floating around this valley probably came from 3 to 6,000 miles away, I'm not exactly sure what they are, so I'll continue to do what I can to make the best wines possible without, sort of marketing cliches or tricks. And if I thought the native yeast could do the best job and make the best wine year in and year out, I'd do it. I'm just not convinced of that yet, so I apply a little care in that. Question number 3 was from Dean Green. Is China's fine wine market closing? Is Clos Pepe in China? Well, I just read that there's a new austerity measures from the new chairman in China, and they're recommending people don't drink $1,000 wines because they don't think it's sort of appropriate for their style of government and their style of culture. So yeah, the first growths have taken a huge hit in the last 18 months, but what's really starting to become popular are wines from between about $15 to $70, which is perfectly in the range for Clos Pepe wines, although we don't quite make enough for them to get out of the United States, and to export to China would be a big issue. So our wines are not in China, although they would do well. Also look into Japan and Korea, and the Drops of God, or the Tears of God, or the Drops of God, this new manga comic that's really getting Pinot Noir really popular in the Far East, especially in Japan and China, Japan and Korea. Pretty interesting stuff. I have a question from Michael Solis. Aging window for Santa Rita Hills wine. Well, I talked a little bit about Santa Rita Hills and Clos Pepe aging. One thing I think you can expect is for the whites and the reds, you can easily let Santa Rita Hills wines go 5 years to start engaging in a little more of the complexity, the elegance, and the earthiness that'll start to evolve once the wines start losing their primary fruit. True of most California wines, will increase with 3 to 5 years of bottle aging if properly cellared 55 to 65 degrees on their side with high humidity. So letting California wines age, I think, is a really important thing. So hopefully I really recommend aging your wines and seeing if you prefer a more sort of restrained and a mature style. And if you do, all you have to do is be patient, which isn't always easy for Americans, but I have faith in you. Go, go, go. Be patient. Drink old wines. And the last question from Wayne Kelterer, a long pour, great blog. What is bottle shock, and is there chemical reactions that we can understand? Well, bottle shock is a little more poetic than scientific at this point because we're not exactly sure what causes it. Some people say it's excessive SO2 at bottling. Some people say it's the effect of the SO2 kind of shocking the wine, that we do an SO2 addition right before bottling. Some people say pulling wine out of a very sort of large container like a barrel and splitting it into 300 smaller containers like a wine kind of shocks the wine a little bit. Unfortunately, I can't talk to bottle shock scientifically because we're not so sure what it is. Does it exist? Well, it seems like if you take a wine overseas, if you take a wine to France, sometimes it just doesn't taste right for a couple months, and when wine travels, it doesn't taste right for a little month. I think the easiest way to understand it, sometimes dogs and cats don't travel easier either. Wine can be sort of a live, living organism, and if you look at it like a live organism, just even if it's in the bottle, well, it changes, and some of those changes aren't always positive. Some of them make the wine better, but if you travel with wine, just be a little cautious of doing that stuff, and being a little cautious of letting your wines lay down after release for a little bit. We hold our wine for 6 months here at Clos Pepe to make sure it's completely over bottle shock before we release it. That's all the questions I have time for today. Really appreciate your time. I hope you're enjoying this. Send me questions at Wes Hagen, Twitter, or go to the fan page, Clos Pepe on Facebook. Really appreciate it. Drink more wine, and I hope you enjoy the haircut. Be well.